coming out for coming out this evening. Hugely appreciated. I know there's so many different pressures on your time, and it's not the most pleasant of evening to come out. So your presence is hugely appreciated. I was at, for the first time since I was about 10 years old, I was at Blantyre, David Livingstone's house or memorial today, for work purposes. And there was a thing on the wall, sort of quotations from Livingstone, and one of them really leapt out at me, and it said, "I'm prepared to go anywhere as long as it's forward." And I thought, that is such a telling thing. I thought it summed up our belief in where Scotland can go so well, that I'm prepared to go anywhere as long as it's forward. And it just struck a chord, and I thought, for no other reason than that I would share it with you. Christians for Independence, a lot of people have been asking what Christians for Independence is, and it's come from, what it's about. And I think it's important that we note that Christians for Independence predates the referendum. So it wasn't born out of the decision to have the referendum on Scottish independence. It was formed in 2009, and it was about how Christians can take part in forming a socially just Scotland. That's where it came from. It predated the SNP winning in 2011, and therefore, contrary to what I've heard other people say, it's not just been invented as a result of this referendum as some kind of front organisation for Yes Scotland. It existed way before Yes Scotland, and it existed way before the SNP got their majority in the Scottish Parliament. And it was founded on the values of equality, fairness and justice, and how those values would be a firm foundation for a progressive new Scotland. And I think that's the message that we wanted to get across tonight. And obviously, as Christians for Independence, we are fully committed to Scottish independence, but we are fully aware that not everyone shares our view. And regardless of what the result is in September, when we wake up on September the 19th, if it's a yes or if it's a no, there's going to be an awful lot of disappointed people. And I think it's so important that whatever that result is, that we continue to work together and that we come together for the greater good, whatever that result is. And there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of anger. I think it's really important that come September the 19th, whatever that result is, we have got to come together as a community for what's best for the country. And I think that for the most part, the debate on Scotland's future has been conducted in an extremely civilised and respectful manner, and I've absolutely no doubt that that will be the manner in which this meeting is conducted tonight.
Also, I'm disappointed we've got to wait for folks, but I'm used to waiting for people. There's a reason. I'm just going to have my notes there. I'm often waiting for people. Usually it's a lassie in a white dress. And not so very long ago at a wedding, this is just by the by, with the introduction, make you smile, at a wedding in Clydebank, and the bride was exactly 59 minutes late. She had 10 bridesmaids. He had 10 groomsmen. They had 4 flower girls, 4 page boys. There was 32 in the main troupe. They one of them were 59 minutes late. And if you've ever seen the Big Fat Gypsy Wedding, this was it. She qualified in all aspects, apart from the fact she wasn't a gypsy. But whenever they come down, I said, "What kept you?" And they giggled away, you see. And I said, "Was it the anaesthetic?" It was a Bucks Fizz. I says, "If you Clydebank, you're liable to the buck fast." But there we are. So I'm used to waiting for folks, and we'll look forward to hear the 2 speakers when they arrive. Let me say to you, of all the decisions you've ever made in your life, where you work, who you're going to marry, when you're going to marry, where you're going to get married, planning a family, buying a house, they're all life-changing experiences, aren't they? But they are as nothing to the decision that you and I are going to make on the 18th of September. Because that decision will change your life, but it will also change the life of your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, and the life of countless Scots as yet unborn. I hope you're up for it. It seems to me you can play it safe, and you can listen to believe all the scary stories, some of which I find really strange. We won't use the pound. It's almost, to me, it sounds like what happens in the playground when the wee fella takes a hump And he goes off with his ball, and he says, "You're no playing with my ball, and you're no playing football any longer." That's what it sounds like. And of course, the nonsense. Remember, Barack Obama and the whole American nation are no sleeping at night. They're scared stiff that we'll go independent. Can you believe it? The floodgates are going to open. Scotland will be overrun by terrorists, if you believe Uncle George Robertson. The effect on the Western world will be, as he says, cataclysmic. It's his word. Maybe his elevation to the House of Lords has scrambled his brain and he's lost his grasp on reality. And of all the idiocy, I think that tops the list. There's going to be financial meltdown. There's going to be poverty. There's going to be barriers at Gretna. Everything bar the four horsemen of the apocalypse coming down Sinclair Street. And we'll get that before the 18th of September. Project Fear. I put it to you, the converse of that all of the great changes, all of the great advances in this world were made by men and women who put fear aside, knowing the challenges, being realistic about the challenges, facing up to them and striding out in faith and belief in their own ability. David Livingstone, Mary Slessor, Andrew Carnegie, Logie Baird, John Locke, Robert Burns were probably all told it'll no be done, you're daft, don't be unrealistic. I tell you, they told Roger Bannister they wouldn't run the mile in 4 minutes. I bet they told teenage Andy Murray he would never win Wimbledon. And I know they told Ross Murdoch, whom I baptised by the way, he would never beat Michael Jimison. The water obviously did him good. And I bet they said to Lindsay Sharp, "Hang on, lassie, stay in your bed. You're connected to a drip, you'll never win a race." But they did. Scotland has become great because of its pioneers and its visionaries. And I tell you this, no new business would ever be started. No new relationship would ever be engaged in if people didn't take a risk. So do you and I have the self-belief to make it work? Or are we going to stay in the same old rut, fearful of failure, unable to take a risk that would stretch out to make a better and fairer country? Because our country is not fair right now. It's a risk. But the alternative's a risk. More power for Holyrood. Spell it out, Mr. Cameron. I tell you, if he and the rest of his London cabal thought we should have had more power, he would have given it years ago. I see Boris Johnson, Mad Boris has waved in with his comment that Scotland hasn't enough already. He's probably telling the truth. This offer is a bribe, a blatant bribe, and we had Mary at the day with the shipbuilding industry. Vote no and see what you get. It leads me to believe that they actually need us more than we need them. I think they're petrified that we'll use the oil revenue and they'll use the base for Trident, but more of that later. What are the key features of this bribe? Essentially it's wait and see. Oh, but it'll be good. Would you buy a second-hand car for David Cameron? Or Mr. Osborne? Or Mr. Clegg? I'll tell you, I would feel safer dealing with Del Boy and Rodney. Vote no and you'll get more powers. The bottom line is that those who make those promises are weighing up change against their own self-interest. Make no doubt about it. It will be a total change and it will not address what I consider to be the basic wrongs of society. Someone likened their country to be like the patient lying in a hospital trolley, submitted to every test and monitoring machine, but immune from diagnosis or cure. What shall we do with the body if the adrenaline shot of independence is rejected? It's a pertinent question. So if you think independence is a risk, just think of the alternative, but pause, I get ahead of myself. Unashamedly, I'm here as a Christian. I'm not the best of Christians. Sometimes I fail to live up to my beliefs, I tell you, in the teaching of Jesus, but I try, and I try hard to ensure that my Christian faith influences my life and the decisions I take. And that's why I'm here. Because as a Christian, for me, the case is clear-cut. But I will also confess to you that I have no other option. I was yes long before they talked of referendum. Because in life I must face up to the fact I have been an abject failure. For 50 years I have campaigned to ban bombs. Number of bombs banned? Zilch. At last I've got a chance. So that's where I'm coming from. I sweated through the Cuban crisis, let me tell you. I'll never forget it. I went to work sometimes thinking my home wouldn't be there when I come back. And later on, as an adult, I began to think I was irrational. But new evidence has appeared that makes it look as if, were it not for John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev, you and I wouldn't be sitting here tonight. Western Bartonshire and Argyll and Bute would be little more than a wasteland. For incredibly, they both resisted pressure from the Hawks in their respective camps when they were all for starting a full-scale shooting match. And let me tell you, the descendants of these Muppets are still with us. Trident, first strike weapon. capable of preemptive strike. Get them before they get you. And my understanding is even if we buy this new machine, the American finger is at least partially on the button. Does that make you feel comfortable? Because I'll tell you, it sure as hell scares the life out of me. But if you're not convinced with that, I ask you, what's the threat? Who is the threat that this £100 billion weapon will deter? What's the threat? Osama bin Laden, the likes of him? No, no way. Because terrorism is the biggest threat today. And you might as well have no bomb than the bomb. Do you know, I find it sad, and this is just by reflection and passing, that many who stood beside me on the anti-nuclear platform over the years are now in power and they've changed their tune. I ask you, 130 billion, that's the latest estimate, invested in health or education or in the son of Trident. That along the road there is a weapon that can bring about the end of the world as we know it. Something that can bring about the end of civilization, indeed of creation. To use it is unthinkable, but in my mind, even to possess it is beyond comprehension. If you really want to give a moral lead, we've been talking about that, vote yes, bin the son of Trident. Did you trust Tony Blair? I must say I did actually. He lied to us. He lied to some of his own MPs, assuring them that they cast iron evidence that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. He lied. And even if it was a mistake, he's never apologised. Is he now exhibiting the care and compassion for the needs that used to be the hallmark of socialism? With his 20 million or 100 million, depending who you read. Keir Hardie and John Smith would be turning in their grave. And why should we trust him or the folk who supported him, like Alistair Darling? They've lost their moral compass. The only thing they want is to retain power. The loss of Scotland, I believe, would diminish their moral status and maybe risk their place at the top table. They don't want that. Let's forget the top table. Let's forget being a world power. Let's begin to make this special wee country of ours a fair and a caring place. Now, even if you think there is some argument for Trident and you hark back to the notion of deterrence, the purchase of this system is an appalling act of prodigality at a time when we see starvation in such a rich nation. Food banks in Scotland, in one of the world's top 20 richest nations. Somebody has got it wrong. How can we take the words of Alistair Darling seriously when he lectures us in economics when he got it so spectacularly wrong when he was the Chancellor of Exchequer? The cheek, the absolute cheek of the man. I don't need any other reason to vote yes, but there are. I'm concerned about the state of democracy in this country. I would say that right now we are being ruled by an elite group of people who have little, or indeed I would argue, no idea how anybody in this hall lives and how the vast majority of this nation lives. Gone are the days of the past when somebody like Patrick Telfer Smollett stood for the Conservative Party and hoped to do good for the community. Gone are the days when a local councillor or union leader like Willie Campbell sought to serve his own folk. No. Today the vast majority of MPs are parachuted in with little affinity to the community they hope to serve. They're simply doing a job, they're careerists. And I believe in Scotland that would change. I think it's already changed. Do you know, in the UK Cabinet, of the 23 that sit around the table, 14 of them are from either Cambridge or Oxford. 41% of them have studied expensive, select and very exclusive private schools. There's nobody here we get through the door. Is that representative? Well, that's the London Cabinet. But you know, when I look at the movers and shakers in Edinburgh, folk picked at random from the political spectrum: Ruth Davidson, Joanne Lamont, Margaret Curran, Annabel Goldie, Willie Rennie, Tavish Scott, Alex Salmon, Nicola Sturgeon, Patrick Harvey. What do we see? Local schools, local universities, diversity, a meritocracy rather than an aristocracy. Betty Boothroyd in a recent interview talked of jobs for the boys, of cronyism. There are more lords now than can be seated in that chamber. In fact, there's 850 of them. The second biggest legislator in the world, only beaten by the Chinese, and there's an awful lot of them. Why? Because they kept their nose clean, and when asked to vote, they voted the right way. They need to be rewarded. And independent Scotland, I believe, will change that. There are fewer places to hide here. I also believe there's a basic inequity in our country. A worker on the minimum wage earns $12,000 a year. The average annual pay for full-time workers is $27,000 a year. For the chief executives of companies listed in the FTSE 100 index, the total remuneration package averages $4.25 million. Corporate greed. And those in Westminster have no desire to change that. American capitalist Nick Hanauer has a clear message for the super rich. If we don't do something to fix the glaring inequities, the pitchforks are going to come for us. Maybe a wee bit harsh, but we need to make our country fairer. So do you stay with what we have, fearful of change, or do we have the self-belief to ensure that this works? In essence, the message to us from Better Together is that we're too wee, we're too stupid, and we're too poor. Well, Norway's no bigger than us, and they're okay. On our own reckoning, or the reckoning of others, we're the 14th richest country in the world. And as far as stupidity, think how much we've given the world by way of invention and innovation. With our universities consistently outshining others in Europe, I tell you, close your ears to such arrant nonsense. Independence will bring opportunities and the chance to create our own future and our own values of fairness and justice. Nearly done. Control our own money, no need to throw it away in crazy wars or unnecessary weapon systems. Right now we have a government that we don't want, we didn't vote for, controlling our future and spending 80% of our money. Vote yes and we have the future in our own hands. Vote no, risk and uncertainty do not disappear. I think as a Christian I'm a wee bit saddened that the debate on independence has often been reduced simply to asking, will the Scots be better off or worse off? Would you vote for independence if it meant an extra £1,000 a year in your pocket? Think about that, would you? I ask you, if the people of Ireland were guaranteed £1,000 per head a year if they accepted British rule again, would they take it? In the course of the 20th century, dozens of states, large and small, gained independence from London rule. And remember, Mr. Darling says you go, you don't get back in again. Well, I'm not aware of a single one ever wanting to come back in again. So, what does that say? Independence is not about separatism. It's not about parochialism. It's not about narrow nationalism. The true nature of independence was once best expressed by Winnie Ewing, who said, "Stop the world, Scotland wants to get on." Stop the world, Scotland wants to get on. Can we afford it? Can we afford to say yes? I'll put it another way. I don't believe we can afford to say no. The pen might be mightier than the sword, but mightier yet is that wee pencil you're going to hold in the ballot box. Use it wisely, use it bravely, use it well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, you're probably so mesmerised that you wouldn't have noticed. As if from nowhere. David and Fiona have decided to join us. We need to upstage that idea. I was so relieved that the way it all worked out that you went first, because I thought, well, how do I introduce you? It would be like introducing the Vatican to the Pope. They'd have kind of known who, this is very much your turf. And so I actually did some sort of looking about. I thought there must be something I can say about you. And it turns out that you have conducted over 6,000 funerals in your 38 years, 4,000 weddings, and was it 3,000 baptisms? It's quite a remarkable record for anybody. And most recently, I hear you sort of tend to the needs, the spiritual needs of the golfing community.
Doing it again.
Which is now, no less important, but slightly, well, maybe not as well known to everybody, is Fiona Sarwar, who's come down from Perth this evening, a rather long road from Perth. Stirling Flats next time, Dave. Fiona is currently a full-time mum to 2 young children. She's a graduate of both Strathclyde and Bradford universities and is an active member of the Church of Scotland. And we are absolutely delighted that she has taken the time to come down and speak to us tonight. Fiona, you're public.
Blame traffic, but we're here in one piece, which I think is God's grace. We're pushing it a little bit there on stage. So, I'd just like to begin by saying what a pleasure and a privilege it has been to be a part of this campaign. I've had the chance to meet and work alongside the best and the brightest in Scotland. So I would urge you, if you haven't already, I'm sure you have, to get along to other meetings as well as this with your local MSPs. I'd particularly push The campaigners like Dr. Philippa Whitford, I got to see her the other evening, and she was just a real inspiration. And I think if you've got undecided friends, you know, get them along, or at least get the YouTube on. They can watch that. Like others in the Yes campaign, or Women for Independence, or Pols for Independence, which are all other mini parts of this that I've been working with, I have political reasons and economic hopes, as well as perhaps cultural reasons for voting yes on September the 18th. Politically, I have longed to see electoral reform come to the UK, but the Westminster government remains unmovable. I'd like to see proportional representation rolled out across general elections, and I think it's time for us to see what a difference it could make. I don't want to live in a union where Scottish elected MPs make up 9% of the British government, so regardless of how they vote, that voice is just not heard. I've heard the statistics and am beginning to grasp the economic contribution that Scotland makes to the UK. This is truly an unbalanced relationship, and we have the ability to, of course, stand on our own and one day thrive as a more balanced and equal society. Culturally, I'm not putting my cross next to the yes because I have any hang-ups about being British. I was born in England and have family living there, and truly believe we will continue to have the rest of the UK as our closest friends, neighbours and partners. But I do believe that when faced with a choice, as we are now, as to whether Scotland is a region or a country, that the answer is clearly a country. But I'm here tonight as a Christian for independence. So, putting all of that aside, I thought it would be nice to reflect upon a passage from the Old Testament that keeps coming back to me during this campaign. The Evangelical Alliance has been touring during this time, hosting debates around the question, what kind of a nation? I don't know if you've been to any or if they've had them locally, but that's sort of how they've posed this, I suppose, trying to stay in the middle somewhat, but they're sort of saying, what kind of a nation do we want to be? In Micah 6:8, we're asked a similar question. It says, and what does the Lord require of you? And the answer, we're told, is to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. So let's look first at walking humbly. I'm going to the polls to vote yes because I'm proud to be of a nation of 5.8 million. I will be happy to be known as a country that is small in number but big in heart. We have a strong reputation internationally for business and innovation, but also for hospitality. Let us be bold to build upon that reputation and not one of empire building and illegal wars. We're walking humbly in Micah with our God. I strongly believe that there is room in a modern Scotland to worship freely. I know some have fears that an SNP government, or whoever we elect, might herald in a society of secularism that pushes out the church. But I have been reassured, along with many during this process, by several MSPs, that this is not the case. Most importantly, an independent Scotland will have its foundation stone a written constitution. And our church leaders will be invited to be a part of the formation of that written constitution. But more so, you too have the chance to have your say right now. So if you go online to the Scottish Government's website, I don't know if you know this, but right now there's something called the Scottish Independence Bill, which is the interim constitution. And you have the chance to go and read that, and then to give your response and to fill out a form. And at the end of it, it says, is there anything else you'd like to say to the government? And you have the chance right now to say, whatever you might feel is really important for building our nation. What an exciting time to be able to speak out and secure faith as central to our society. I want to live in a country where all people have the space to follow their faith free from discrimination and prejudice. We have the chance to secure this in an independent Scotland. As a lifelong student of politics, ever since I was little, I have followed and most recently predicted the effect that David Cameron and his party would have on our country. And I'm saddened to see so much of my fears coming true. At the meeting last week with Dr. Philippa Whitford, she shared somewhat of the shocking truth, really, of what's happening with NHS England. Within a year, I think 12% almost has been privatised. This is billions and billions of pounds worth, and that's going to the right friends of the right people and putting our NHS deeper and deeper into debt. We are losing much of what has made Britain so great. Scotland has voted against the bedroom tax, but still it has been enforced. We were not even asked about fracking, but it too will be rolled out. As Scots and Christians, this is our chance to say no and to stand up for the vulnerable in our communities. The UK is now one of the most unequal societies in the world. These deep problems are not going to disappear when we wake up to an independent country. But, in the words of Philippa Whitford, when we meet challenges, we will find Scottish solutions. Solutions, I believe, that will better reflect our values as a socially democratic and compassionate society. Finally, the first and perhaps most important thing we're told in Micah is to act justly. There are many who are still smarting from the injuries endured by Scotland during the Thatcher years. Some perhaps are acting from a place of pain during this campaign and are seeking justice for these wrongs. I can't really speak into that, as I was too young to perhaps remember, but I don't really feel that that's what it means in this passage. We cannot build a nation upon old hurts, but on hope, compassion and fairness. I want to be a nation that goes into conflict zones as peace builders and not illegal aggressors, where we are free to open our hospitals and provide aid to places like Gaza and Iraq, because we are known as a peaceful country and not allies and providers of arms. We should be focusing on our nation's children, on education and schools, and not nuclear warheads. On September the 18th, Scotland has a remarkable opportunity, but so do we as Christians. We have the chance to really make our mark in building and shaping the future of our country. I'm not sure that there has been a better time to put our faith into action and really place godly values front and centre. This is a choice for hope, and I hope we grasp it.
Bed here, as you were saying, Fiona, I think going bed's here. He came here with the window down. He's the director of Christians for Independence. David was brought up in Cumbernauld, and after university worked for BBC Scotland as a journalist, and was the editor of Newsnight Scotland when it first launched a number of years ago. Fortunately, he's managed to escape the BBC and has since worked in Rome, Washington, and more recently in Edinburgh. And he is a technical whiz kid, clearly. And I'm delighted to introduce David Kerr. Thank you very much. Are you sure?
Okay. Right, forget the presentation. My name is David Kerr, and of Christians for Independence, and I am a Christian for Independence. I'm particularly a Catholic who's for independence, and I've been asked this evening along by Brendan O'Hara to explain how I get from Catholicism towards a yes vote in September the 18th. And having worked with Brendan at the BBC for many years, he's small but ferocious, and his brother was my boss. I'm Pavlovian-esque trained to know that when O'Hara says do it, the only reply is, you know, when he says jump, you say how high. So it's great to be here, and it's also, I think, the fact that we have a Church of Scotland minister, an active Church of Scotland layperson, and a Catholic here as well. It represents the broad spectrum of Christianity that is at work across Scotland in this independence campaign. I think it's long gone are the days of sectarian division and interdenominational rivalry. I'm often reminded of that story of the fella in Coatbridge, where my sister stays, very kind of Irish Catholic town in Lanarkshire. And he's away for many years and pursues an eminent career in engineering. He wants to come home. He goes for a job in Coatbridge, The managing director says, fantastic CV, you've done everything around the world, you built dams in China, power stations in America. Final question though, what school did you go to? The fella says, oh come on, he says, I know what's going on here. I go away all these years, I achieve all those things, I come back, nothing's different. He says, well, if you must know, my mother's Catholic, my father's Protestant, I'm neither. Now what about the job? He says, no problem son, your mother starts on Monday. So, oh yeah, oh gosh. Sorry. Right, we'll get there. So, yeah, so the first thing to say obviously is, as, we got it?
No, sorry, it's not going to work, I'm afraid.
Okay. Yeah. I suppose, yeah, so how did I get from Catholicism to a yes vote on September the 18th without the aid of a PowerPoint presentation? I suppose to answer that, I want to take you away from 21st century Helensburgh, which I know can be difficult. I remember it was 10 years ago at a summer holiday walking across the borders, and it's when I was in Hawick, I came across the phrase that they used down there with all seriousness, that a day out of Hawick is a day wasted. And I'm sure the same is true in Helensburgh. But I'm going to take you away from Helensburgh in the 21st century and take you back to 19th century Belgium. Why 19th century Belgium? Well, if you go back to 19th century Belgium, and in particular the 1840s, there you find a very interesting character by the name of Vincenzo Pezzi. He was not Belgian, as you can imagine. He was Italian. He was the Pope's ambassador, the papal nuncio to Belgium. And it was there that Vincenzo Pezzi observed at first hand the emerging industrial revolution. And he was horrified by what he saw. The squalor and the degradation, the factory conditions, and the domestic conditions in which the working class were forced to live. And Vincenzo Pezzi is significant because several years later, towards the end of the century, he becomes Pope Leo XIII. And he's significant to this story because in 1891, he publishes a very significant document. If you like, it takes traditional Catholic or traditional Christian social teaching and casts it, develops it in a modern setting. That document was called Rerum Novarum, which means in Latin, I know you all know Latin, it means on new things. And in that he addressed the conditions of the working class and wanted to offer a traditional application of Christian social teaching to these new realities. And since then, Catholic social teaching of documents, which all take their root from that singular document of 1891, and this is the compendium of the social doctrine of the Church, which I picked up when I was working in Rome. It runs to about 400 pages, but really it can be summarised in two principles, and those two principles both begin with S. The first principle is solidarity. That is that we are all responsible for each other, and in particularly the most vulnerable. When we're asked the question, am I my brother's keeper? The answer is most definitely yes. The second principle, though, is subsidiarity. That care should be applied and is best applied, most effectively applied, at the lowest possible level, starting with the person and the family and the community, the church, up to the level of the state. And that really, in the 18th September, is the question that we're being asked. It's a question of subsidiarity. Because back in 1997, we, the sovereign Scottish people, took a democratic decision that in terms of subsidiarity, in terms of upholding the common good, and that's the purpose of these political decisions, is to further the common good, that we wanted to take many of the powers which applied to our lives, which were then vested in the London government, and to rest them at the level of Scotland with our national government in Edinburgh and our national parliament. Things like energy and education and health, and that's all the stuff that Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon and Fiona Hislop and all those people deal with, Jack McConnell, Donald Dewar and Henry McLeish before them. But certain things remained in London. And the three big things that remained in London were, of course, foreign policy, defence, and the economy, including welfare and currency. And that's the question we've been asked on September the 18th. Is the common good of the people of Scotland, in particular the most vulnerable, who should always come into the equation in a disproportionate way when we make up our mind, is the common good best served by taking the decision that, in terms of subsidiarity, these three powers should be vested at the level of Scotland and should not remain at the level of London? So let me just go through each three and obviously make the case for a yes vote. The first one, foreign policy. I think it's something to do with the anniversary of the First World War at present, but I'm a great aficionado, and always have been actually, of the war memorials of Scotland, and just these manifestations of public art and public devotion and public memory, which really sprung up organically in the wake of the 1914-1918 conflict. A conflict that people never expected that scale of loss and destruction. But when you go into the smallest town in Scotland and you look at the number of names in the war memorial. In fact, I remember looking at the war memorial in Helensburgh. It's an absolutely beautiful war memorial with the gates through to it and the domed in. But, you know, Helensburgh is a biggish town, but it's not that big a town. And there's about, in fact, I know exactly how many, there's 204 names on that memorial to the first 204 men from Helensburgh and surrounding areas perished in the First World War. And I always think when you go to those war memorials, and we still live in the shadow of that First World War in terms of the destruction to families, the whole generation of women who, I was speaking to a friend of mine who's a journalist at Holyrood yesterday, and his great aunt, when he asked her why she'd never married, and she was of that generation, said there was just no men left. And that destruction, I think, still lingers large, and I think it's a reminder. In fact, Professor Tom Devine, Sir Tom Devine, the eminent historian, calculates that amongst the war dead in the First World War, it was the Serbs, the Turks and the Scots were the highest rates of mortality. And in fact, the Scots perished the most from battle deaths. The other two were from disease and illness. And that's a reminder, those statistics and those monuments, that of the reality of what happens when we, the sovereign Scottish people, and our political structures don't control our own foreign policy. As my grandfather used to say, Britain will always defend her empire down to the last Scottish soul. And that's not just been the story of 1914, 1918, that's been the story since we gave away our independent foreign policy in not 1707 but 1603, the day that James VI went south, only to come back once for the rest of his life. And it was a story in 1603, in 1914, and even more recently. I was the assistant editor of Newsnight down in London, 2001-2002, at the start of the outbreak of the invasion of Iraq. And they had a classic situation where, you know, the majority of the Scottish people did not want to go to war in Iraq. What's more, the majority of our members of Parliament at Westminster voted to tell Tony Blair that the case for war had not been made, and yet we went to war. Another reminder of what happens when we don't control our own foreign policy. And when we leave our foreign policy in the hands of others. William Hague has now moved on as Foreign Secretary. We now have a man called Philip Hammond. And do we really believe that when Philip Hammond goes in to negotiate in NATO or the United Nations or the European Union or any of these corridors of international power, that uppermost in his mind is the common good of the Scottish people, and particularly the most vulnerable within our Scottish communities? It's laughable because we know it not to be true, and yet somehow we're asked to accept that second or third class status when it comes to foreign representation. and we lose out in terms of not just real policy decisions, but real policy decisions that affect real lives. You know, over 180 British soldiers killed in that war in Iraq, over 100,000 Iraqi civilians killed, and still the pain and the hurt and the turmoil and the bloodshed continues, as we see day and daily in the news. So in that first point, foreign policy, I think there's a real case to be made that on September the 18th, that on the principle of subsidiarity, for the service of the common good, foreign policy should be repatriated from London to the level of Scotland to serve the common good, and particularly the common good of the most vulnerable. Number two, defence. I had the great privilege of spending a couple of years in Rome as a Vatican correspondent after I left the BBC in 2009. And I had the great privilege, or one of the great things about it, I mean, was living in the sunshine, putting the shorts on every day, knowing full well what the weather was going to be, and never being shocked or proven wrong. You know, gelato in every corner. But one of the lovely things as well was, at that time, was following the words and the actions of Pope Benedict XVI, a man who I thought was both a very saintly person and certainly a very scholarly person. And every year, as the Holy Father in charge of a diplomatic mission, so the Holy See has a network of ambassadors, nuncios around the world, and every year they would gather in Rome and he would address the ambassadors on what he would see as the key foreign policy questions which they had to consider. And he said something on the matter of defence I thought was both striking and pertinent to the current debate. He said, one of the most serious challenges is increased military spending and the cost of maintaining and developing nuclear weapons. Enormous resources are being consumed for these purposes when they could be spent on the development of peoples, especially those who are poorest. Now, I know defence is a very sensitive issue in this town and in this community, and I would like to think that whatever changes emerge post-September 18th, in terms of a change towards a non-nuclear Scotland, this community benefits economically and socially. I think the proposition at present is that Scotland's chief naval base would be here in Helensburgh, which would be an infinite improvement in terms of the number of surface ships that we have in Scotland, because at the moment we've got 0, courtesy of the Royal Navy. But there certainly does seem to be something awry when we're talking in one part of Scotland about £100 billion being spent on a replacement for a Trident nuclear weapons system, when only, if you're driving at normal speeds, only 40 minutes away, myself and Fiona 20 minutes away, you get past Glasgow with a life expectancy of a man is 53. I mean, one of the great ironies, one of the shocking ironies of the Commonwealth Games is that as each of the nations marched into Celtic Park during that opening ceremony, and as we were raising money quite rightly through UNICEF to benefit these nations, somebody posted up, I think on Facebook, the life expectancy of these African and Asian nations versus the East End of Glasgow, and everyone was far and away ahead of what you would expect living in, you know, Congo versus the Carlton. And that's the shocking reality, and there seems to be a disparity, as Pope Benedict recognised, when we can let such largesse in terms of military spending sit cheek by jowl with such poverty so close by. How can we accept that? And this community's got a real responsibility and opportunity to be at the economic and ethical cutting edge of solving that conundrum. Because these weapons are not only immoral, they can't be used within a just war context, they're not even useful. You know, we're looking at the plight of the religious minorities who are taking to the hills of Iraq. You know, in what way can we help these people with a sea-based, submarine-based nuclear weapons system? The same was true with the war in Iraq, the same was true with deployment in landlocked Afghanistan. So I think there's a great opportunity and a real case to be made that there's September the 18th and that second issue, that in terms of subsidiarity, defence decisions are better taken at the level of Scotland rather than Westminster. Because again, the reality is that on the replacement for Trident, the majority of Scottish politicians at Holyrood, at Westminster, and the majority of the Scottish people have said, no, we do not want this. And yet, because we don't have that subsidiary power, because we're not empowered on defence decisions, we can't do anything about it. We shouldn't accept that second best, and we can do something about it on September the 18th. Third and final area, the economy. That's the third big area that lies with Westminster post 1997 and the re-establishment of our Parliament in 1999, voting the UK Prime Minister David Cameron. But at the outset of this campaign, he made a very valid point, which he obviously been told not to make since. He said that supporters of independence will always cite examples of small, independent and thriving economies such as Switzerland and Norway. It would be wrong to suggest that Scotland could not be another such successful, independent country. And I think we all know that to be the case. We look about us at the rest of the countries in Northern Europe, and we are no better than any other country, but we're no worse. And we can certainly economically pay our own way and more. We already do it within the UK in terms of the amount of tax we put in compared to our population and everything else. And we could certainly do that. There seems to be, or certainly should be, no dispute on both sides of this discussion that Scotland is certainly not too poor or too weak or too stupid. We're just as good as anybody else in terms of governing ourselves economically. But the problem for us in terms of trying to be economically competitive is because it comes about because we are part of the United Kingdom, which is a one-size-fits-all economic policy for all regions and nations contained within it. And again, another condemned government minister, Vince Cable, put his finger on it just a few months ago when he said that the southeast and London are sucking the life out of the rest of the UK in terms of economic activity. Because in other countries where either you have independence or even you have a greater degree of federalism, I lived in the United States for a year, and you have states, for example, in the US that are less populous or more remote from centres of population, and they use the powers that they have as a state to lower personal taxation, lower business taxation, or the smarter thing quite often they do is to incentivise certain industries that they want to grow. Because otherwise, all business in the US would go to New York, or it would go to California, but you get these states in the middle that use the powers they have to be competitive, to grow businesses, to bring in businesses. We can't do that as being part of one-size-fits-all United Kingdom. And when better together politicians talk about the United Kingdom being this fabulous entity in which we share the risks and rewards in terms of the financial burden, essentially what they're meaning is that the wealth should be created by the City of London and financial institutions, and that should go towards paying the welfare bill for Liverpool or for Newcastle or for Glasgow. And that's no way for any of these great cities of the British Isles to live. And I think it's no surprise that as you move more northerly to more northerly parts of England, support for Scottish independence rises and rises and rises. I think we saw a couple of weeks ago the old Labour, in every way MP for Liverpool, Peter Cumfoyle, come out supporting Scottish independence because they realise that this is a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the regions of England to break up that economic stranglehold that the South East have and to create a more dynamic and crucially a more fair economy, a more equitable economy for all the parts of the British Isles. We're not interested in robbing Peter to pay Paul in terms of this. We're not interested in petty economic politics. We're interested in a win-win situation for all the parts of the British Isles. Again, you know, am I my brother's keeper? You know, our brothers are in the north of England, the northwest, the northeast, but Scottish independence is also good for them in terms of growing the economy and hopefully create a more equitable share of wealth. Because again, this is my final point. You know, it's such a crucial factor as a Christian and as a Catholic in terms of social teaching is equity and fairness. The other big document of the Catholic Church, which is known as the Catechism of the Catholic Church, contains all her teachings, states quite clearly that excessive economic and social disparity between individuals and peoples of the human race is a source of scandal and militates against social justice, equity, human dignity, as well as social and international peace. And yet we live within a United Kingdom where out of the 34 countries in the OECD, that club of developed nations in the West, we're 28th when it comes to equality in terms of income division. And that's an inequality that's been growing since 1975. So it's not a David Cameron thing or even a Tony Blair thing or a Labour or a Tory thing. It's a Westminster thing. And there doesn't seem to be any great disquiet amongst the British political elite that this is a problem or that they seek to address it. And we've got a huge opportunity on the 18th September to say that we can change it for the good of the poorest and everybody in Scotland and actually across the British Isles if we take that decision. Again, subsidiarity to say economic decisions are better taken at the level of Scotland rather than remaining at the level of London and Westminster. So that's really my 3 points is on those 3 issues. To say that the judgment I would propose, and it is what's known as a prudential judgment, Christians can come to other decisions based on the same ethical factors. But the prudential judgment I come to is that the principle of subsidiarity is best served on the 18th of September in terms of defence, in terms of foreign policy, in terms of economics, by lowering the level that power is decided and wielded at to the level of Scotland by voting yes. And I'll finish on this. You know, this campaign's brought many things. Some meetings I've been early for, some I've been late for. I've been to Benbecula, I was in Skye just the other day, I'm up in Banff tomorrow. But most significantly, 3 weeks ago I got engaged. On the island of Battersea, just before I was speaking on Barra. It's the only act of union you'll find me speaking up for. Just vote yes there, my dear. Thank you very much. And yes, we are better together. And you know, to some extent, that choice that faces on the 18th of September, we're all of different dispositions, and some of us are full of kind of chutzpah and confidence and nothing phases us. Others are more cautious. I think the research shows, probably which every woman in the room knows, is that women in life are not more risk averse, but they are more risk aware. For a man, simply saying come on, it'll be brilliant, that's enough, we're up for it. But on the whole, we want to know why will it be brilliant, what's the numbers, what's the figures. And when I look at my mum or my sisters, I can see that, you know, that codename Project Fear, which Better Together have, it kind of plays with them a little bit. But to some extent, on 18th September, there's 2 futures that are on offer to us. And the very nature of the future is that they're uncertain. And both paths have a degree of uncertainty about them. But the same is true in getting engaged or getting married. There's no guarantees that you're going to be wealthy, you're going to be healthy, you're even going to be happy, you're going to have children, you're going to have employment. But what you're doing is saying to your spouse or your future spouse, I think this is the best vehicle we can create, using the wits that we have about us at the moment, to be able to deal with the shocks and the knocks and the good days and the bad days that the future brings. And that's really what we have to think about September the 18th. What's the best vehicle in order to deal with the uncertainty of the future, in order to deliver a Scotland which is socially, economically prosperous and socially just, and in particular benefits the most vulnerable. And I would also say that's a yes vote. I think somebody said the other week, it's not about nationalism, it's about normalism. And if every other country in the world can govern itself, well, so can we. Because as I say, we're not any better, but we're not any worse. And we saw all those countries at the Commonwealth Games, one by one, they've all declared independence from London. None of them have ever asked to come back. What a golden opportunity we've got, and particularly from a Christian perspective, to benefit the most vulnerable in our society. And so I urge you on the 18th September, obviously, clearly, to vote yes.
And it really was unbelievably lovely for. So thank you. It's over to you. If anybody has any questions, anything they'd like to raise, please just let me know. And as I say, direct it to one of the speakers, or if it's a general point, and we'll pick it up among ourselves.
Yeah, just picking up on what David was saying towards the end of his talk there about the inequality. I think the inequality in our society is one of the things that drives a lot of us to go out in this Yes campaign. That we are seeing ever more wealth being held in fewer and fewer hands, and the wealth, the difference between the wealthy and the poor is just growing wider. I just wondered, looking forward a little bit into if an independent Scottish government, I wonder if you would suggest what measures you would like to see that would actually start to address that particular problem. Are there any practical measures that you would suggest to them to adopt?
Well, it was kind of directed to
Okay.
you, so you can take it along the table.
I think I had the great privilege of sharing a bed and breakfast with Leslie Riddoch, the journalist and the broadcaster, who I've been a great admirer of for a long time, and listened to her podcast when I'm out running. And she's published a book recently entitled Blossom, What Has to Happen to Help Scotland Blossom. Because independence is part of the solution. It's not the be all and end all. I think it's an intrinsic part of the solution. I think it's difficult to see a wider solution without it. It's a key piece in the jigsaw, but it's not everything. To some extent, independence is not the last day of the camp. You know, Independence Day is not the end of the road. It's the beginning. You know, because all of us, it's one of the things I suppose those of us who have hankered after self-governance for a long, long time. But every now and again, when you've been out campaigning, cold nights or hot summers, infrequent as they are, and long campaigns and losing campaigns, as I've done 3 times in Westminster elections, you think, what a lot of huff and puff for such an unremarkable aspiration to just to govern yourself. You know, I think that, never mind 50 years, I think 5 years after independence, nobody will quite believe that we ever opted for any other circumstance or situation. I think Blair Jenkins, the chief executive of the Yes campaign, often puts the analogy of, let's say the referendum was reversed, let's say that we controlled all sovereign powers at Scotland, and on the 18th September we were being asked to transfer defence and foreign affairs and economic powers to London. How many people would vote for that? So, I mean, the present setup is an absurdity. It's an absurdity that many people, or many of us, accept because it's been around for a long time. But, so in terms of day one, I think an important thing is which Leslie Riddoch highlights in her book, is that we can't simply replicate the remarkably centralised British state, writ small, within an independent Scotland. And that doesn't just mean the distribution of civil service jobs. When I stood for and lost heavily in Glasgow North East in 2009, it was a 6-month campaign, and one of the great privileges of that 6-month campaign is that I could see that in Glasgow North East, which contains some of the poorest communities in Western Europe, Glasgow North East is, you know, Shettleston and Milton and the Garngad, places like that in central Glasgow. And I could see the principle of subsidiarity at work, and I could see it actually had an effect in terms of turning around people's lives. that when people were empowered at the lowest possible level, 49 times out of 50, people respond in the most remarkable ways. And that applied to housing cooperatives, housing associations, food cooperatives, credit unions. It was those small-scale institutions, those little platoons, that were having the greatest effect in turning around people's lives and actually defeating poverty in a way that the centralised state didn't necessarily achieve, and certainly big business was not necessarily interested in going anywhere near. So I think that there's a real case to be made that within an independent Scotland, and this is a case that Leslie makes in her book, that we have to look towards, actually it's the pan-European model. It's even the model of local governance that we had prior to 1975 in Scotland, where we start to really distribute power, wealth and influence down to the lowest possible level. And one of the great things about the Yes campaign has been that so many people who've never been involved before have got involved in grassroots politics. We can see there's energy and enthusiasm there. And I think that we have to not only grasp independence, but grasp that concept that, to use the phrase of the economist E.F. Schumacher, small is beautiful. You know, I think we really have to apply the small is beautiful principle in terms of provision of social services, recognising, as I say, in conclusion, that when local communities and local people are genuinely empowered, that they do remarkable things. Because what we have at the moment in Scotland is a level of local government that's neither local, I mean it's on a vast, vast scale, not just geographically, such as here, but even in terms of population. And we have local authorities that are slightly bigger than some European countries. And in terms of governance, they don't really have that much power. They don't raise a lot of their income, and a lot of the things that they do, they're told to do by statute. And so we have to both govern ourselves at a national level and then really empower to the smallest possible level, knowing, as I say, that small is beautiful.
Just following on from what you were saying, Ian, about independence really preceding or rather Christianity preceding the message of independence. I completely get that. Now, we're aware that in some parts, especially in these parts, we've seen some evidence where that message is not getting through, and we're seeing so-called Christians who don't get it. How do we reconcile that? And more importantly, in the short time that we've got left available to us, how do we get the message out to people who are or would be Christians? Because I firmly believe there's a lot more Christians than churchgoers. And if we can get the message out to this congregation of people, then perhaps we can influence them a wee bit better. How do we do that?
I really don't know, but you're absolutely right in what you say. I mean, I am very, very disappointed that so very few ministers and priests, as I understand it, have come out and said anything positive. They're all fence-sitting, and that's become classic in the church. And that's not the church that started. Peter got out the boat and walked in the water whenever he was saying, "Sit down, you clown." So, I mean, the Christian church's at risk. Jesus says to 12 guys, go into all the world and preach the gospel. If you have your heed, they did it. And that's why we're here today. But we don't have that in the church. And we play safe. And it dements me. I think as well, the actual congregations are incredibly conservative. But we know that. Get a minister or a priest to try and do something different. They either say, "Oh, that's been done before and failed," or "Oh, you're not trying that, out of my dead body." We are incredibly conservative. And it's just the antithesis of what Christianity is. I could bang my head against a brick wall over it. I don't know how we do it. I think this is the way. I just wish to God that David could be beamed to every church and chapel in Scotland on Sunday.
Sorry.
No, I'm just going to say it's not an answer, but it's the best I can do.
You'll be picking up on the point of the sort of small c conservative nature, and the difficulty that we had in publicising this meeting. It was remarkable, you know, that we were met with, the best we were met with was by being ignored. The worst was with open hostility, to the extent that someone actually took such offence at being handed a leaflet that they wrote to David to tell him that they were absolutely outraged that someone dared to give them a leaflet inviting them along to this meeting. So it's been very difficult. But I think your point that there are an awful lot more Christians than church goers is absolutely spot on. And I think if we continue to talk about social justice and about equality, about fairness, and how we can build a new society based on what are essentially Christian teachings and Christian values, that message will eventually get across, maybe not to the small c conservative congregations, but to the wider Christian community, and also the non-Christian community who exactly share those values. And that's why our message has always been and will continue to be one of equality and fairness and social justice, because I believe it's the right message, and I think it's a message which will eventually, if it hasn't already, get through to people. Is there anybody?
Yeah. Can I just make a reference to the fact that most of the decision makers in the councils in this country are politically motivated, or put in by their political masters. And the first one to be voted into a political position in a council in Glasgow was in 1911, when a Labour lawyer got into the council. And up to that time, it was all members of the community, wealthy businessmen who had time and money to make the life of the Glaswegians better. But as soon as the Labour Party member was in the council, all the parties wanted their members in. And I think for Scotland to start and create a nation that cares is to try and start with non-political councillors who know what's happening in their own street, just ordinary men and women as independents. And I think that's a challenge to the Scottish Government, to introduce a bill that will give independents at least 30% of the council jobs, and they should be encouraged to do this. Thanks.
Yeah, again, at the time I had Italy, and Italy's quite typical of most European countries when it comes to local government. One of the lovely jobs I used to get to do was, during the summer, Pope Benedict would retreat back to the hills of Lake Albano, to the little village of Castle Gandolfo. And so each Sunday I had to go up to Castle Gandolfo, 20 minutes in the train out of Rome. And you go up the hill to Castle Gandolfo, and the most significant building in Castle Gandolfo, strangely enough, is not the Papal Palace, but just to the right on Independence Square is the town hall where the mayor lives. And Castle Gandolfo's probably got about 4,000 of a population. If you live there, you'd rather be the mayor of Castle Gandolfo than the president of Italy. And the mayor gets to wear a sort of little tricolour sash, green, white and red. And it's, you know, it's huge because, again, Europe was built on that principle of subsidiarity. Small is beautiful. Very small local authorities, which is you know, what Scotland had. You know, the traditional, you know, Scotland's a kind of outlier in terms of the principle of bottom-up empowerment. If you look at the Declaration of Arbroath in 1320, and it's radical in many ways, but not least because the nobles of Scotland, okay, it's not the people of Scotland, but it's the nobles of Scotland say that we give assent to King Robert as our king, but if he betrays the nation, we'll remove him and we'll appoint another king. So there's no notion of the divine right of kings there, and there is that sort of gradual notion of the sovereignty of the people. And again, in 1952 when Ian Hamilton and John McCormick challenged the legitimacy of Queen Elizabeth II's styling in Scotland. It was the case in terms of, because I think the ruling was that the Queen can call herself Elizabeth the 26th if she wants, but they said that there was no equivalence in Scottish constitutional law of the unlimited sovereignty of the Crown and Parliament. So the Scottish tradition was that if lower level institutions can do something, they should do something. So as Brendan says, I grew up in Cumbernauld. Our family moved out in 1975. Cumbernauld was established as a new town in 1956. And initially Cumbernauld was what was known as a landward area within the county of Dumbartonshire. And so it was administered by the county, but as the town started to grow, it took on more powers. It became a small borough, and then it became a large borough, just before it was abolished in 1975. In fact, they only got time to appoint one free man of the town, who was Hugh McDermott. And the council was controlled by the SNP. And controlled by a man called Gordon Murray, who, despite the fact that he only had one eye, ferocious political operator, who only had one eye, and but still always campaigned with no sense of irony under the slogan "Man of Vision." But yeah, I think it's one of the consequences of our local government units being so large in terms of geography and so large in terms of population, is that there's a real sadness when you go to towns across Scotland the size of Castle Gandolfo. You know, so I was up in Portree and Skye the other week, and like so many Scottish towns, it's got its townhouse sat in the town square, and the townhouse or the council chambers are available for weddings and high teas and funeral teas and public meetings. The one thing they don't have is a town council. And I think there has to be a move towards that, and I think once you empower at a lower level, you not only get better outcomes in terms of quality of services and quality of lives, but I think when you have that more localised scrutiny, then the party ticket starts to fade away. It becomes more important about who you are, because we know who you are. You know, to some extent it's immaterial you're standing for the SNP or Labour or whatever. You know, I know you're good or you're not good, or you're capable or you're incapable. When you're these large-scale local authorities, it's very difficult to know who are the people in control or to hold them to account. So to some extent that anonymous party system does start to emerge, and I think you're absolutely right. It's to the detriment of local government, and it's to the detriment of real people's lives.
I think you're reading my notes. But no, I think one of the problems is what we were talking about a wee bit on the car down, is that we've almost become a bit of a paint by numbers, kind of politically. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were saying their mum, she'd asked, "Oh, how do you think you'll vote?" "Oh, I'll probably vote no. I don't know how I'm going to vote really, so I'll just vote no." And we've sort of lost the ability to really interact and really interrogate our choices, and I think to a certain extent there's such a safety in that. That's how I've always voted. That's what we know. That's what we trust. That's what will be. And I think the exciting thing about the referendum and this process is that there has been an awakening, and that town halls are being used. You know, and Philippa Whitford was sharing that she's already been invited into a process where how can we continue this? How can we take this forward? Because we can't have just another Westminster. You know, that's what we're all kind of trying to choose against. That's what we're trying to move away from. And I think it will take real imagination and bravery for a different kind of leadership, and almost a different generation from those, perhaps without naming, but those that are spearheading this particular campaign, those that have called for this choice, are not perhaps the ones that will be able to break through and make these new choices. It will have to be others coming behind them, and it will have to be us that calls for it and that says, I don't want this to stop. I don't want this to stop. I don't want that what I've been a part of to stop. You know, and I think that we need to really take ownership in that process. I think sorry, just we need to be positive about people that want to stand as independents, because often they're kind of put to the side, or you know, it's not really. A funny example, I lived in the Orkney Islands for a long time, where you're born a Liberal Democrat and you die a Liberal Democrat, but for a while to get onto the council, they all stood as, one person said they'd be an independent, and then they all stood as independent, because there really isn't enough variety. And I think we need to support those people that will perhaps be brave enough to say, okay, like what he was saying, let's be known for who we are.
So I'll come to you in a second, lady there, but just picking up on that point, in terms of Helensburgh, and certainly the Yes movement in Helensburgh, it's something that we've talked about quite a lot, and it is about nation building. It's about, you know, we don't all just go back to where we were, you know, on the 19th of September. You know, whether it's a yes or whether it's a no, Scotland has changed almost. It's almost unrecognisable. The town hall meetings that you talked about, you know, there are hundreds, possibly thousands that have taken place and will take place right up until the 18th of September. Ourselves in Yes Helensburgh Lomond, I think, we've got Nicola Sturgeon coming next Monday, and that will be our 13th public meeting between Helensburgh, Cove, Kilcreggan, Luss, Arica, Rue, Cartris. You name it, we have taken the message out, and we have a fantastic response. We've been to great public meetings, but this isn't going to go away, because that's replicated throughout Scotland, and Scotland has changed. And even if Scotland doesn't vote yes on the 18th of September, which I believe we will, and I sincerely hope we will, but Scotland isn't going to go back to being the Scotland it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. We have changed as a people, and I think as we have changed, the country has changed, because it's our country to change. And because of that, we in Yes Helensburgh Lomond have taken the decision that Yes Helensburgh and Lomond will continue. And we have already got a meeting planned for the beginning of November, because we've got a nation to build, or we have a campaign to continue, because this doesn't end, and it doesn't end with politicians, because this is a people's movement, and this is a democratic movement, and there is something profoundly democratic in what we are doing. And to try and put that back in a box because of an election or a referendum, it's just not going to happen, and we're not going to let it happen. So whether it's yes or whether it's no, this campaign continues, and this strive for Scottish democracy will continue, not just in Helensburgh, but throughout Scotland, I'm absolutely sure. Sorry, you've
That's okay. I'd like to make the point, call myself a Christian, because having been brought up in such a Calvinist household, that would be a sin of pride. So I'll just say that I tried to be a Christian, even though I am a member of the Church of Scotland. I have to say I am one of the people who do not go to church, believing that it's not about where you go on a Sunday, what you do on a Sunday, it's throughout your life. And I would agree with you all that the principles for self-determination and everything that you all spoke about is completely in accordance with my beliefs as a Christian. What I'd like to make a remark on what you all said about the difficulties that you had in setting up this meeting, and that'll certainly come as no surprise to any of us in the Yes campaign in this area. What I would say that is, when you base a campaign based on fear and anxiety and negativity, you're dealing with dark forces which give licence to certain baser instincts in certain individuals. And when you then legitimise an attack on an individual on an ad hominem basis, you do not just legitimise the attack on one person, you legitimise attacks either verbally abusive or direct violence to other individuals who are seen as part of the opposite side. And that is something that we have certainly experienced in Helensburgh to probably a greater extent than they have in some areas. And to me, as a Christian, even as not as a Christian, as you know, as the forces of and opposite equal forces have an opposite equal reaction, you can see that there is this positive and there is this negative, and there is the negative side is so vitriolic that it is actually manifesting itself not only in verbally abusive attacks but also in physically violent ones as well. And how do you see us reconciling those, not just with the other side during this referendum but afterwards? And how do you feel about that as Christians?
I'll go because I have a degree in peace studies. So I feel I should say something to that. Well, first of all, I'm just really saddened to hear, especially that it's come to violence. And that's the first that I've heard of that. And I've otherwise been so proud that Scotland has...
Can I just say as well that the violence on occasions has come from church members?
Yes, indeed. Really?
Yes.
Let's just say, though, for the most part, this has been a peaceful process, and that the world is watching, and that we have to really press that upon everybody on both sides, that we have a unique opportunity to bring to pass a peaceful way through a national campaign or an independence campaign, which, as somebody who studied how it's looked so differently, I think in many ways it's more remarkable that we've been able to do it so positively so far, and I think that we surely need to stand firmer in being the peaceful and positive ones, and that light will rise to the top. What you were saying about using fear as a tactic, I think is really fascinating. You were mentioning earlier about the road to Iraq in 2002 and 2003. I was in America at the time. I actually lived in the US during that time. A lot of the first wave of moving into Iraq and everything, I was there, and lived with a close friend who had just got married to a guy who was over there, so actually had all his family members fighting. But the way that the US government used fear as a tactic rolled out across the nation, in their just evening news, they would have their amber to red to whatever alert warnings. So whilst you're watching TV, you might be having your dinner, whatever it was, they would be telling you what kind of alert you should be at, what level of attack you could be under, what danger was facing you at all times. And in many ways, there wasn't real truth behind that at all. But this really coincided with, let's sign up and go to war. And in a way, that was the only way that that war was able to come to pass in the way that it was so heavily supported in the beginning by average American citizens, was because they felt in danger and fear for their lives. What am I saying about that, really? I think that the point that you raise is just really interesting and something that we need to be aware of. And as a Christian, my response really is just prayer. I think that we need to pray light into those dark areas, but also
they've also used, they've tried to use sectarianism to divide the town as well, quite blatantly with orange rocks and no campaign. It's been really quite cynical and quite bad.
So on behalf of Jesus, just offer one word, and that would be turn the other cheek.
Regional authorities into England, is that they didn't call them regional authorities, they called them metropolitan authorities and various other ones. That's how you get rid of the Coventry City Fire Department, which an old uncle of mine invented the yellow colour scheme for, ironically, and all these things. And therefore we had to then tag on to that. And when I first joined the Fire Brigade, I originally joined the Central Area Fire Brigade, which was Dumbarton, Stirling and Clackmannanshire. And eventually we became into the giant Strathclyde of a brigade, and we were forced in that particular direction because it became paramount because it became parliamentary rule from London. We had absolutely no say in it. So therefore you lost all your small local authority councils, like the parish councils, like the councils in Helmsford, Dumbarton District Council, the Vale Council, etc. all disappeared. And the only opportunity you will ever have of retrieving something similar, I'm not saying the same as that, and I'm not saying doing away with the big fire brigade or anything like that at all, because there are savings that can be made for the beneficial of people. However, the reality is, if you want to get control back, the only way you can possibly ever achieve that is to vote yes.
I totally take on board what you're saying, and as an elder of the Church of Scotland, I'm appalled at some of the things I've heard. Not particularly surprised, perhaps, but appalled. And the bad bit in me says, let's name and shame. Yeah. Okay, Ian. One of the things that adds to the total, or there are several, but one of the things that adds to the total negativity of the campaign that's being waged, and I don't mean our side, is the attitude of some of the newspapers. There is just nothing good, there is nothing positive, there is no acknowledgement that people across the country are talking about this, are thinking, thank God, about this. My daughter and I spent a long time tonight, and we think we might have persuaded 3 people.
Wonderful.
If not, we'll deal with them.
Praise the Lord.
Yes. And this is wonderful that people are really talking about it. But you constantly are battering your head against the wall of newspapers which are based in London, funded in London, putting out the London View. Can you see any way, apart from what we're trying to do, which is talk to people, can you see any way that that could be changed? Do you, and second, do you think there's any way that at some point they may pick up on the fact that Scotland isn't thinking like that in the main? Almost 50% of Scots are not thinking the way some of the headlines are shouting at us. Is there anything we can do? Do you think that they will finally realise and give up?
Yeah, that's the one for you.
It doesn't look as if there's any sign that they will. I think more than ever there are ways around it, and people are actually tuned in to what's going on. We're becoming, in a way, this whole process, this whole Yes campaign's about, as individuals and collectively as Scots, we're becoming more and more grown up.
That point's very true, but when Alistair Barron made his point the other week there about if it hadn't been for the Bank of England bailing out the Scottish banks, we would have been kaput, which he knew when he was telling that was a complete lie. And actually, in effect, and probably most people, I'm saying this because my sister's here and she's not normally very politically aware, and that's part of the reason I came here, because she stays in Helms and I stay in Vale. So I'm trying to cure her, but I'm not trying to cure her. And anyhow, cut a long story short, most people actually were under the impression that Barclays Bank didn't receive a bailout. It was the only banks that got a bailout, according to the British press, was the RBS, the Halifax Bank of Scotland, and the Northern Rock. Bullshit. The Americans bailed out to the tune of £586 billion, Barclays Bank. We bailed out in total to all our banks £128 billion. The Royal Bank of Scotland received, what was it? I think about 350 million from the American banking system, and the Bank of Scotland, I think, received 150 billion. From them.
I think the interesting point about that is,
and it's never been covered.
I presume you know that because, the reason I know that is because the day after the debate, Business for Scotland issued that article.
I've read it before, but it was actually the information that came up out of the congressional report, whereas in America they were using the other way around. because they're holding their senators, or they're holding their bankers to account, to the effect that why did they bail out a Scottish bank and European banks? But the reality is with banking, what they have to do is wherever your business is based, you've got to bail it out. And that's why we bailed out the Irish bank there a couple of years ago.
Just very, very quickly, but you're absolutely right. When Alistair Darling made that statement, the journalists he made it to knew it was nonsense. They knew it was a lie, and they were complicit in that lie.
So
and when they reported on it, they knew that they knew exactly what they were doing. And the problem that we have with the media, well, I don't exclude the broadcast media from this. I think all the media is that far too many so-called journalists have actually become campaigners, and their integrity is questionable at best. And 15 years ago, there's nothing we could have done about it. But fortunately now, again, this part of this democratisation of this whole affair is that we can do something about it. Not as much as we would like to do, but immeasurably more than we could have done 10 or 15 years ago. And on the newspapers, I would say that folk generally buy the newspaper that reflects their prejudice. And people, I don't think, are influenced by reading newspapers. I think people are influenced by people more than newspapers. I'll come to you in 2 seconds, gentlemen there.
If there is such a compelling case for Christians to vote for independence, has it been the experience of the panel that our spiritual leaders across all the denominations are, if not publicly, then secretly in favour of independence? And if not, why not?
Can I just say that, and David probably knows this, this guy Peter Mackenzie come on to me and said, would I be prepared to put my name down as somebody who supported the yes? He pleaded with me to try and help him to get 50, I think it was Church of Scotland guys, and we've struggled. And the reason we struggled is that if you're in the Helensburgh St Andrew's Church, and you know that a lot of your congregation are resolutely no, it takes a brave man to say, I'm yes. And sadly, I think today there are few brave clergymen. You know, the prophetic voice has gone. No longer George MacLeod or people like that. So no, the church leaders are sitting in the fence. Thank God there are one or two out tonight that I know in our presbytery, and they're canvassing. Thank God for them, but they're in the minority. Sorry, Drew.
I said, I think the issue of whether or not we vote yes or no on the 18th September from the perspective of Catholic social teaching is a prudential judgment. People can take the same principles. So we're working from the same principles in terms of a preferential option for the poor, solidarity, subsidiarity. And it's absolutely licit that people could come to a different conclusion, but hopefully we're motivated by the same laudable aims. And my hope would be that those laudable aims would lead somebody to make the prudential judgment that yes is the best way to achieve that. Catholic clerics generally wouldn't involve themselves publicly in terms of the debate. I think that's the right thing to do because they do have to minister to an entire flock. So there's certain issues where they wouldn't necessarily involve themselves, but certainly lay Catholics clearly can be involved. And how religious leaders will vote, there's obviously greater freedom to be involved from the in the sort of Reformed tradition. Interesting that Peter Mackenzie has had some success in getting ministers and some well-known ministers giving public backing.
Mostly retired, you'll notice.
Mostly retired.
See, watch from the list.
But yeah, so we're hoping to, over the next week or two, place an advert in one of the national newspapers with Kirk ministers backing independence. But no, I don't think we'll necessarily see, we certainly won't see the bishops of Scotland speak out, but I think that's the right position for them.
Can I just
sorry, Fiona, are you finding it within, do you find that problem being a very openly yes supporting Christian in your church?
Yes and no. I think one of the things is that the General Assembly voted that the church would remain neutral, which is why so many are not coming out. But I think that whole, is that not right?
Oh, it is right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so that's, I think that's
It's
technically,
correct.
I think that's technically right. But I think that the trouble with that is that if you have an opinion, it's going to come out. So I think one of the interesting things is that within the circles where I've been, there's almost an assumption that you're voting no in many ways. So recently I've been working in a Christian bookshop and coffee shop, and again, conservative with a small c is definitely kind of the vibe, and I tried to say something one day and that almost abusive shut down, and I didn't say anything for ages. But then the other day, well, I met Philippa Whitford, so I couldn't keep it in. And I managed to speak to one person on their own, and he said, well, officially I'm undecided, but... And then we had a great conversation. And so I think, you know, keep talking to people, because the assumptions might be, you know, that you're no, or that they don't want to say. And I'm not entirely sure where it comes from, but I think that there's an interesting thing within Christian circles. Often this status quo, we don't like to rock the boat, and we like to keep things calm, and we go with the sheep kind of mentality. For me personally, it's never been a problem to go against that. So I think keep having your conversations.
We're desperately short of time. In fact, we're kind of run out of time. If there's a comment, I'll take a couple of comments and then finish with a question. Is that a comment for yourself? A question. So a comment from Henry, a quick comment from Alexander, and then a final question from yourself.
A very quick comment. Take your point about how the clergyman must administer to the broad cross section of the congregation. However, I don't think that's an excuse for allowing lies to prevail. I think they've got a moral obligation to tell everybody what the truth is, and what's the truth, then you make up your mind. I think that's what really should happen.
Alexander?
I'd just like to congratulate all the family members here tonight on being brave enough to come out. I'm Church of Scotland Protestant there, but I think too there's a kind of whether you come from like a Roman Catholic tradition, Protestant Reformed tradition of all the churches in the island, from Baptists, you've got your RUC, etc., right down to Scientologists. But in the main, the two big players in Scotland, even now with declining memberships, you've got to remember they're part of the system. It takes individuals to speak out, to talk, to debate, whether it's like maybe a ladies' guild, or a couple of guys in the golf course and stuff like that. Say, oh, how do you feel in the state of the nation? An old question, it's timeless. Talk one-to-one, do a wee bit of confidence building, and that. And I'm sorry I disagree with yourself here, with the bishops. The bishops have a long history from South America, Africa, everywhere else, of shutting up, creating social issues, but not national issues, and they're wrong. And one day, maybe some from the Church of Scotland higher up are going to kind of encourage their convictions, and hopefully on the Roman Catholic side too, because it's not enough just to play safe.
Okay, we have very
bishop support.
Run over. So final question.
I was just wanting to ask you, Fiona, you'd spoken earlier about being part of the Women for Independence group, and this is more a women-based question rather than a religion-based question, but in your experience of going round and doing meetings like this, I was just wanting, what are your feelings, because we've heard so much about women being more risk aware and taking time, and I wondered what your feelings were about how you feel the talking to women and just the discussion in an informal, friendly, non-competitive way is going. Do you think it's winning over?
I think from what I heard the other night is that that's been highly successful. Of course, there was the mention of cake and how that always helps, and I've had a running joke with myself and somebody else that I'm baking for independence in many ways. I think that does help. I don't know, gender chat. It can be, you know, it's been portrayed as, oh, we've been slow to jump on board, or this, that and the other. In terms of like doing development work, which is something else that my background is, the women is the key area and have so long been overlooked. And it's, women are able to, like what you were saying, oh, men are gung ho. Well, what that has meant in development terms is they've been given the money to go and do this great project, and they've gung ho gone and spent it in the wrong way quite often. Now, don't mean to really do broad gender, whatever. That's just an example, but I think that we need to take this as a positive, and we need to, yeah, okay, they're maybe being cautious or they're collecting that information, but that can be a positive in that they haven't jumped on the no bandwagon necessarily. And I think there's still time to catch, and I would say that it's positive in that the information is there to point towards yes. So if you have a group of people, whatever gender, that are willing to really listen to information and really weigh in patiently to a conversation and an ongoing dialogue, then surely that will lead towards a positive outcome, because they're not willing to just accept a soundbite of, coming back to my minister who wrote something about emotions aside, there's no plan A and there's no plan B, so I can't vote this way, and I was outraged. But I just think, well, let's take out emotions then, and let's really look at plan A, and let's look at plan B, and let's see the information. So I think it's there to be seen as a positive, and there's definitely still time.
As we keep forwarding.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. It's been a wonderful meeting. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you to our speakers. It's been so entertaining, so enlightening, incredibly informative. Now, we've got the hall at 10 o'clock, so we've got about 20 minutes. There's still tea and coffees at the back. If David and Fiona and Reverend Ian wouldn't mind just mingling for 20 minutes, and we can have a chat while we clean up round about you. As we clean up round about you, it's not a cue to get out. It just means that we have to do it. So if you come in, please hang about, have a tea and coffee. It'd be good to have a chat with you. Final piece of news. Nicola Sturgeon is coming to Victoria Halls on the 18th. That's Monday. This Monday coming at 7 o'clock. Please come along if you can. Tell people about it. It'll be a fantastic meeting to go along to. We've got badges and car stickers and whatnot at the back. Help yourself for a small donation. So once again, thank you to our speakers, and thank you for coming along.